Welcome everyone. Today we have our new episode. This is 527 episodes and we will discuss on futuristic leaderships. We have our world famous leaders from around the world. We have Professor Edward, Professor Shaheen, Mr. Marshall, Professor Fred Philip, Professor Donald, and David Smith. First, I would like to give chance Professor Edward to discuss about futuristic leadership.
Well, thanks for this very important program. And I want to start by, first of all, talking about just saying a few words about what do we mean by futurism or futurist. And most people are kind of looking at the day to day, or if you're a business person or an entrepreneur or a policy person, or maybe just the very short term future. But what futurists want to do is really look in the long term. They want to look especially at technology and how technology interacts with the economy, with social institutions, with public policy, and with culture. How these all come together and what the world is going to potentially look like, not just next year or a few years from now, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now. And there's a very important ethical element to futurism and futurists, and that is most of us, I'd say all of us, frankly, want to create a better world. We want to understand the dynamics of where technology and economies and social institutions and so forth are going so that we can steer things in a good direction, so that we have a future that fosters human flourishing. I mean, certainly in the United States, and I know around the world, so many people think of the future either as a terrible dystopia, things are going to get terrible, or more likely, we want to see a shining city on a hill. We want to see futuristic looking buildings and people are all prosperous and healthy and all. So that's what we're talking about. So looking at the world today, where is futurist leadership? And I say you can look at it in several categories. First of all, futurist thinking. Who's thinking about these things? And especially in the last couple of decades, some of the, and what I'm going to do, by the way, for your audience, for your World Talent Economic Forum folks who are listening to this, after you listen to this wonderful show, I hope you'll take some time to actually do some reading, because if you really want to understand futurist leadership and be a futurist leader, you kind of have to understand all the incredible work that's already been done. Probably you call it the grandfather or father of it recently has been Ray Kurzweil and his seminal book, The Singularity is Near. This follows up a couple of other works that he has done. He's a fascinating guy, and he really is looking ahead to a singularity where basically humans and machines mesh so much that it's impossible even to predict where things are going. And he's probably the premier futurist we have today. I would say that also futurism and the leadership has been focused especially in the transhumanist movement and the longevity movement. A very good overview of thinking is found in The Transhumanist Reader by Max Moore and Natasha Vita-More. Max Moore is a philosopher, very bright guy. He does his introductory chapter, I think, is one of the best you'll find on transhumanism, but this folds into futurism as well. In terms of thinking like a futurist, I recommend a couple of books. One, and this is in terms of futurist leadership, is the great David Wood, who heads the futurists in Great Britain. And his new book, Vital Foresights, really helps you think like a futurist. And again, he's a great futurist leader, a great futurist thinker, and he's actually done a fine book on how to think like a futurist. So I really highly recommend this book. You can also go to podcasts and videos that David Wood has on from the London Futurists. And you can see that is on YouTube. So I recommend you take a look, because David is certainly one of the world's leading futurists. By the way, if you're interested in thinking like a futurist, I also recommend a book by my friend Ugo Chukwu, and it's an exercise in clear thinking, which is something we very much need today. And if you want to be a futurist, hey guys, you need to take a look at books like this. But I want to also talk a little bit more practically. first of all, if you want the vision of where the world is going in a very practical sense, and if you are an entrepreneur, a would-be entrepreneur in the Asian Pacific area, you can't do any better than Peter Diamandis. And his latest book is "The Future is Faster Than You Think." And Peter was he created the X Prize, the Space X Prize, which was basically a private prize to reward any party that could put up a rocket into suborbit twice in a 2-week period and being capable of carrying 3 people. He's very much big into private prizes as a way to boost entrepreneurship. But Peter also was co-founder of Singularity University with Ray Kurzweil. And this really gives you an on-the-ground look at here's where technology is and here's where it potentially can lead us. So in terms of futurist leaders, Peter Diamandis at Singularity University certainly are on the top of the list. There's a lot of great work done in terms of age, longevity. I know you've had some things on that recently. Of course, Aubrey de Grey is excellent on this. My favorite overview book, if you want to know where that's going, is The Science and Technology of Growing Young by Sergey Young. Very readable. But I also want to mention someone who's been in the news lately, and that's Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is not a thinker in the classic sense of writing these books, these wonderful books. Elon is a doer, as you all know. He co-founded PayPal with Peter Thiel, made a fortune, decided he wanted to launch rockets, so he created a rocket company, and now human beings are being brought up into orbit, into the International Space Station on Elon Musk's private rockets. Of course, he founded Tesla. He's founded Starlink, which of course is a way of getting Wi-Fi and internet access to rural areas, and he's been very important in the war, the Ukraine war, Putin's war against Ukraine, because he's been shipping in some of his technology so that Ukrainians can actually get access to the outside world where Putin's people are trying to block it. As you know, he's trying to purchase Twitter. Twitter has been known for its censorship, for a very strong ideological view, and censoring legitimate talk, not just bigots and so forth. And Elon Musk is a First Amendment purist. He says basically, if you want to progress, you have to have open discussions. And Elon is trying to buy Twitter, and he's scaring the heck out of a lot of the postmodernists and the wokes, as we call them in this country, who believe that we should have some kind of overarching government or elites ruling things as opposed to coming up from the ground. So this is kind of an overview of futurism. I'm very optimistic about the future, by the way. My organization, the Human Achievement Line, in fact, is working right now on a futurist educational curriculum for Africa. I'm working on a futurist educational curriculum for a couple of places in the United States here, trying to sell it as something that we get in the schools. So futurism isn't just something we discuss among ourselves and have a great discussion. We want it to get outside of this wonderful forum. And so that's one of the things I'm working on, and maybe I'll be working with some of you on it. So those are my intro remarks. Sorry for going on so long, but this is just too exciting not to.
Thank you, Professor Edward. We have our School of Talent Economy. What we discuss, like before this session, we take a class, and many young people from around the world, they join this School of Talent Economy in online for developing their leadership, developing their skills. So anyone from our speaker side, if they want to volunteer our School of Talent Economy, they can. And already we are involved with at least 50 different countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, Rwanda, Middle East, a few countries. So hopefully your contribution will be life changing, especially for the youth community. We have our another new speakers, Professor Shaheen. He is from Malaysian University of Science and Technology. So, Professor, what you want to add for today's discussion, especially for futuristic leadership?
Yeah, actually, it was a very interesting point that Prophet was already mentioned about the futuristic leadership and how it will be we lead up and in future how the world will look like. However, if we want to look at it from the different perspective and not just look at it from the technology perspective, we can see that there is something missing in all of the concept that we have, and that one is a human intelligence. In fact, when you look at the majority of the forum that we have, everyone talk about AI, everyone talk about the technology, everyone talk about going to a space and all of those things. But we somehow forget the root that we had. And as a human, how the leader in future should be more human centric. In fact, you can see even if you go maybe to Kremlin and you want to have a chat with maybe let's say Putin, he will say, "Okay, I wanted to expand the better future for Russia. I want to have a brighter future for Russian, but is it a really brighter future for everyone else?" So, in fact, somehow maybe we need also a little bit slow down and think what is a characteristic of a future leader in terms of the human intelligence, how the future reader should care about human. Yes, there are so many jobs are going to be replaced by technology, and what will happen to human in future? Or will be the slave of the machine and robots, or we have to evolve ourselves in line that we can also in fact somehow use technology rather than to be used by technology. Now we are leading to the direction that we are already used by technology. Either it is a Twitter, either it's a Meta, either we are going to Facebook. We already reached to the point that we became an object for all of those technology owners and holders. And in fact, I really want to also hear from other members of this forum that how we can really lead to the different direction. Yes, technology is there. Technology will be there. Technology will be expanded. We are going to moon very soon. Maybe we are going to Mars. Maybe after 10 years, very fast. But what will happen to human? What will happen to us? And how we have to be more human centric as a futuristic leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shaheen. You are 100% correct. That's why we developed this talent economy, and I believe all of our people, we have more than 300 scholars from around the world, from Ivy League University, from Tando, from Transhumanist, from everywhere. We are working together, and yes, human development is the most important things. Everybody just discuss about technology and investment. We do more focus on human resources. Yes, with the help of modern science and technology and engineering, we can achieve this talent economy. And already, Harvard Business School, they also collaborate with World Talent Economy Forum, and they also believe this talent economy is the future of human civilizations. So we have our honorable speakers and professor from Tando. He's president of Tando. It's one of the famous think tank from USA. Professor Fred Philip. Great leaders for intellectual community. Professor Fred Philip, what you want to add for today's discussion?
Thank you, Sharif. Um, I would like to refer to another book, one that I wrote, um, called What About the Future? It came out in 2019, and I will post the URL for it. Of course, you can search on Amazon, but I'll post the URL on the comments on Facebook after the episode is over. The publisher is Springer. Unfortunately, they sell their books at ridiculously high prices. So it may be that you'll want your employer or your university to acquire it for their library. I would highlight two main points that come out of this book. One is that when organizations do their planning, often a failure is because of the planning team has wildly different ideas about what the future is and how to deal with it. One dimension on which a committee may differ is what timescale do you conceive of the future? And I have a little joke. I apologize. It's a rather macabre joke for early in the morning, but you know, when you go to check in at the airport for a flight, the clerk will ask you, "And sir, what's your final destination?" And I think to myself, I know my final destination. I just hope it's not today. Uh, so obviously, the clerk is thinking final means today or tomorrow, and I'm thinking in a much longer term. Another dimension of the future on which committee members may differ is whether you're an optimist or a pessimist about the future. Whether you think that the future is something that happens to you, you know, say, oh, as God wills, or as the old song goes, que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. Or you may be someone like Steve Jobs who says, no, I create the future. The future is not something that happens to me. So we have, or as Edward said, Elon Musk creates a future. And then another dimension is how much people care about the future. And this is a matter of some crisis, because the aspect of globalization that we call global capital liberalization means that it enforces corporate short-termism, meaning that there's great pressure on a CEO to produce instant rises in stock price or lose his job. So the idea of long-term corporate planning is unfortunately de-emphasized because the markets dictate that CEOs put their attention on short-term results. And to bring it back more to the human dimension, as Professor Shaheen mentioned, a radio host once interviewed a Los Angeles gang member and said, where do you expect to be in 10 years? And the gang member said, I expect to be dead in 10 years. Well, okay. Is there any hope of getting such a person to understand or care about the difference between spending and investing and all the other elements that retirement planning, all the elements that involve our own personal planning for the future? So in terms of prediction of what the future is like, let me bring up a couple of diagrams here. A conventional view of the future, and we go from left to right in this diagram, and the past looks like it is fixed, okay? The present moment is the apex of this cone, and then the future, as physicists call it, is a cone in space-time where more varied things may happen. But this is not really true, because if you ever watch a courtroom drama, yes, you find that different witnesses have different stories of what happened in the past, and that these stories get more diverse as you go farther into the past, and that a similar cone can represent what happened in the past. So the past is not fixed, at least in the legal sense. And left and right are reversed on this camera, so it's difficult to... Okay, now the neuroscientists and psychologists tell us that the present moment is not a single point either, because the way we perceive the present is colored by our biases and by our future expectations. So we have in the top diagram here, the point representing the present expands to have some dimension. It's not a dimensionless point anymore. And if you can see the what's on the bottom, where we have two dotted lines representing two events, representing one event, you can see that any event that happened in the recent past can have multiple explanations and multiple predictions. So if we have any hubris about prediction, you can see that this view of time, which appropriately enough looks like an hourglass turned on its side, means that prediction of the future is not as easy as we might think. And so if you have 10 futurists and they make point predictions about what's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, well, one of them is going to be closest to being right at the end of those 2, 3, 5 years. And then they can pump their fist and do a happy dance and go on a TV talk show and become a celebrity for a short time because they were right. But what good does that do the rest of us? Not really much. And here's where we get to the difference between convergent futurist techniques and divergent ones. The US military, for example, is very keen on the divergent technique called scenario planning, where you figure out what are the driving forces in the today's economy or society and extrapolate them out and make usually about 4 different stories that you hope might bracket, not predict, but bracket the actual future that might eventuate. And so this distinction between convergent and divergent futurist techniques points to the second main point from my book that I want to emphasize. And that is that the point of forecasting is not to be right, it's to be ready. The point of forecasting is to be ready for the future that does eventuate. And that implies that your organization to prepare for the future needs to be flexible. Okay? Some people call it a nimble or agile organization. Okay? And a system theorist will say that agility is wasteful because, the organization is supposed to be efficient. But efficiency means using your resources without any waste at the present time. But efficiency does not mean that you're prepared to shift to another mode of operation when the future comes. Okay, I'll skip some of the things that I had planned to say in favor of brevity. There are, I think, the 2 most reliable ways to forecast that have proved definitive in the past. One is the long economic waves, the so-called K waves or Kondratiev waves, that roughly relate technological advances to economic expansion and recession. And even those are beginning to become more, these are 60-year waves if you consider the expansions plus the contractions economically. And they've been reasonably reliable in the past. The economists associated with those studies are Kondratiev, Schumpeter, Kuznets. But some people think that the K waves are becoming shorter or will not exist in the future. And that's the subject of ongoing research. The other way that remains very, very reliable for forecasting the future is demography. You've heard the phrase demography is destiny. I show you two population pyramids there. This one is Ecuador. The other one, United States. and it has male on one side and female population on the other side. And the bottom is basically the infant age group, and the top, very narrow, is the number of people in extremely old age groups. And you see that demography of a country is always very predictable because the number of people who will be in the country's workforce 18 years in the future have all already been born. Subject, of course, to immigration policies and so on. The number of people of working age who can support the pensions of older people are extremely predictable. And in Ecuador's case, there's a lot of workers who can support the state pensions of retirees. In the United States, this is not so rosy a picture for retirees. And immigration, which could fill out the picture because mostly young people immigrate, is very controversial politically. But demography is destiny, and it's very handy for forecasting. I want to finish up with maybe two controversial statements. As you might know, for many years I was editor-in-chief of this journal, Technological Forecasting and Social Change. And I must say that many of the editorial board, including me and including the founding editor of the journal, do not believe in the singularity. We don't have time to go into the reasons for this, but we don't believe in the singularity. And personally, I'll say that I'm not interested in the longevity movement. I tend to agree with James Bond. Ian Fleming had James Bond say, I don't want to waste my life trying to prolong it. And I find I must agree with that. I want to live my life. Thank you for allowing me to give comments.
Thank you, Professor Fred Philip, for your excellent contribution. Professor Donald.
Hi. Well, I really appreciate what Fred just said because I want to talk about leadership, but I had to kind of clarify a few things. Actually, I'm writing a paper right now that it's taken quite a lot of effort because I wanted to think through it and give it a lot of punch. But I think that if you just think it through and think what they're saying about the singularity, you'll realize that it's basically, frankly, ridiculous. I mean, it's not just not going to happen. If you think about it, you'll realize that. And I think, one of the core reasons, and I'll just say this briefly, is that human beings are prediction machines. To even understand language, we have to make guesses. So if I say something like, Sally helped Jane do the dishes and she really appreciated it. And then I asked, did Sally appreciate Jane or did Jane appreciate Sally? No computer right now can get that better than random chance. Computers simply cannot guess anything like that are absolutely totally common for us, and we have no idea how to get them to do it. So if you listen to people who make these science fiction predictions, they always have this caveat, which is, well, technology is always advanced, so we're just going to figure this out. But they don't have any idea how they're going to figure it out. I mean, it's just like, you can say anything. We're going to travel faster than light. It's going to, well, they do it on Star Trek, so it's obviously possible. I mean, you listen to what they're saying, and they always have this caveat that this incredibly difficult, unsolvable problem that may not have a solution, but they'll solve it. But I'm just going to say there. And I also want to say that Elon Musk is in big trouble with the SEC because he never really intended to buy Twitter. He just said it so he could jack up his Twitter stock and sell it, which is what he did. And he also did the same thing with Tesla. Elon Musk is about making money. That's all. The Twitter people, the supposedly First Amendment. The First Amendment is about the government controlling speech, not private companies. And what they were mad about, the libertarians were mad about, is that they were regulating people that were giving disinformation about vaccines. And if you look under the hood, that was actually, to a large extent, deliberate disinformation by people that were trying to hurt us. I mean, they were doing it on purpose to hurt us. And I want to mention something that Fred said, is that I have a friend, his name is Paul Sappho, and he teaches the future of engineering and technology at Stanford. I grew up with Paul. I've known him since I was in high school. And Paul is on the board now, but for years he was president of an organization called Institute for the Future in Palo Alto. And they do exactly what Fred is talking about. Large organizations hire them to do scenario problems. And I know them well enough. They gave me a pile of their reports. So I've read through their reports to see what they wind up looking like. And one thing that they do is I want to point out that's really interesting. It's the same thing IDEO does, is they don't just get engineers to predict the future. When they get a room full of people to discuss what's possible, they make sure that they have artists and sociologists and psychologists and people from all various walks of life across the board, so that when they're looking at what's possible in the future, they're not looking at it from one perspective. They manage to get a number of perspectives so that they don't just get the bias of what the hopes and desires are of one particular group. Because as we can see, engineers tend towards science fiction, and so that's kind of what I wanted to address, some of the things that other people said. As you know, I'm a social scientist. So basically where I click into this is I'm really interested in the idea of leadership itself. And over time, in not that many years since the turn of the 20th, when the 19th century turned into the 20th century, at that time, leadership was considered, what a leader did was they created meaning. And I have a great example as my uncle, who passed away a few years ago. And he had a company, it was called Steiny and Company, and it was one of the bigger electrical engineering firms in California. It had about 500 people, and they did things like put the lights in the LA freeway and put the lights on the Golden Gate Bridge and things like that, large commercial projects. And when he passed away, I went to his memorial service, and the people he had working for him had worked for him for 40 years. Everyone that worked for him loved him. I just, by random chance, was going home from a musical gig that we did, and a guy gave me a ride, and he was an electrical engineer at the bottom level. He was one of the guys that actually put in the streetlights. And I said, you know Steiny and Company? He says, yeah, I worked for him for a while. Everyone thinks they're the best in the business. And he could do all these things because of his personal relationships with people, get, a little bit lower price from the vendors and things like that. So he could make sure he got a bid. And the one thing, there was pressure on him to sell his company to somebody like Bechtel or one of the big giant engineering firms. And what he said to me is, he said, the bean counters, they would just, look at the balance sheet, and they would just fire the people to make the balance sheet better the first time there was any downturn. And he said, every person in my company puts food on their family's table by working for my company. And he says, I would never do that. Now, that's something that goes back to what others have said, which is that we've developed a model of leadership where in companies where we have to ask the question, is this a good leader or not? And the only way that we can measure leadership is by how much money the company makes. And so the leaders, the CEOs of these companies have an incentive to basically make the balance sheet look as good as possible, to make the company look. And there's only two ways to do it, is to get more revenue or have less cost. And the easiest way to get less cost is to fire people. And so that happens frequently. And what I'm contrasting is the idea of a leader who makes meaning and helps people have meaningful lives, and a company that treats people as just cogs in a machine. And the cogs in a machine thing goes back to a guy named Charles Taylor, who tried to get people to be as efficient as possible. And Amazon is right now the epitome of that. They actually have sensors that can tell if people have taken breaks for too long. And so that's the epitome of that type of leadership. Netflix is the opposite. Netflix absolutely trusts everybody to do a good job and doesn't monitor them at all. In fact, a manager can basically say that they need some money to do a project, and they can just requisition the money. They don't have to go through an approval process. And they grew like crazy all over the world doing that. So what I believe the future of the leadership is when that one of the reasons that AI isn't going to work, isn't going to have a singularity, is if you think to yourself the knowledge that you have the knowledge of how to go into a store and interact with people. If you play a musical instrument, you don't think about what notes you're going to play. When you read, you don't think about how it is that you're reading. When you're reading, you don't think about how it is that you form the world that you're getting into when you're reading a novel. You don't think about, most of the knowledge that you have is tacit knowledge. You don't know how you know the things that you know. And organizations are similar. They have tacit knowledge that over time is built up that the organizations know. And that tacit knowledge, as the tacit knowledge in my uncle's company that made it so successful, that tacit knowledge is something that, especially in the creative world that we're living in, is something that needs to be nurtured and preserved. And a leader that treats people as just cogs in a machine isn't going to make that happen. So the leaders of the future, as the world values creative people and knowledge more and more and more, are people who are going to be able to preserve and value that tacit knowledge. And that has to take place by learning to respect the individual. And that has to take place through empathy, respect of the individual, and developing leadership styles that treat people as valuable.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Sorry, Sharif, thank you so very much. And get my button clicking correct here. I love the topic we have today and where it's going. And what has been discussed, I relate 100% to, and I agree with Fred and others. I am not a fan of singularity either, as you look at how it's been implemented and things. I almost feel compelled to go back and pull up a couple of examples of where futurist leadership and things have applicability to kind of give you a context. For example, there's places where when you're doing work in the community, this is, let me see if I can get this one right. Let me turn that off. This is a futures report done for an entire state on targeting industries for the future. This created for the state of Indiana something called BioCrossroads, which was a statewide initiative, but you had to do it looking out the future as opposed to looking backwards. You've heard me say on several of the broadcasts before that there's a reason in your car you have a big front windshield and your rearview mirror is so small. It's more important where you're going than where you've been, but you have to understand where you've been to be effective. But you also have to take things and understand how to apply them in context. This is a little project I did back in 2000, looking at research and technology grand challenges. This set the future, and still in today, because this is going through 2030, for one of the US intelligence agencies. You have to begin to put everything in context with what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how to put them in place to make a difference. And the goal of being a futurist leader is, how do you put things in context? How do you put them in to make a difference? And if you don't make the difference with it, then you're being ineffective. Just to give you two other types of examples, one of the things you want to understand when you look at the future as a futurist leader is, what are the disruptors? The things that can change business with the way you're doing it. It can come from looking at various scenarios like Fred mentioned, but you're better off using a more comprehensive view of the future than that, and begin to understand it and put them in place. Sharif, can you pull up that one slide I just sent you? My view of the future is, I believe there's 6 different views of the future, and you have to use these to be accurate. I believe there's an extrapolator, pattern analyst, goal analyst, counterpuncher, intuitor, and an artist. And what's important about these 6 views is none of them are correct. Not all of them have error in them, but the way to be more accurate is to be able to use things underneath each of those 6 views of the future. And I'm not going to go through all 6, but just to give you an example, if you look at the extrapolator view, it's really about how the future is a logic extension of the past. I can reasonably predict it, and I can use trend analysis. And these are a few of the examples which you have for trend analysis underneath that. And there's other tools underneath each of the other 6 views of the future. What's important, it's not one view. And that's where most people get in error. We were doing a project for Motorola where they wanted to see if their satellite phone system was to be successful. We told them, using all 6 views, that it was not going to be as successful as they wanted. And because of outside competition, a whole bunch of reasons, but their engineers, using an extrapolator view, had said it was going to be unbelievably successful. Well, they decided to go with their engineers' views, and they released us from the project. But 9 months later, they came back and said all the figures we gave them using the 6 views were accurate, and they were way off from their engineers' views. And that's the problem. If you only use one view as a futurist leader, you're not going to be as accurate as it can be. Because people who have a futuristic leadership have this ability to take noise out of the system, to take error out of the system, and see the future. You know, they are dreamers. They can perceive what it could be, what it might be, and begin to move towards that direction. But they do it understanding the risks, they do it understanding the errors. And you can do it as a big issue, like we saw with what I showed earlier, with a state trying to change a life science policy. You can do it as an industry, kind of what happened with the semiconductor industry when they did the first roadmap ever done in the United States for an industry, which I was a co-leader on, going for that. Or it can be very broadly. one of my favorite forecasts I did as a futurist was this one for an agency that was saying, what would the internet of 2050 look like? And I still love that forecast. That particular one I got to brief over 1,000 times all around the world. And you take those, but you understand that one forecast totally changed because of an exercise we did called an impact wheel, where we filled up a whole wall with the impacts of what we were looking at. And that helped us inform where we were going with that and what the future would be. But you have to understand that being a futuristic leader and futuristic leadership is not taking just your own view of the future. It's taking them from a multitude of sources. I personally like to do work where I use the 6 views of the future. Then I balance it by the other filters of academia, of large companies, of small companies, of government. And I pull those views in with each of the 6 different views of the future. And what that has provided for me over my career is very enhanced accuracy as a futurist, and being able to be things that are not just informative, but things that are actionable. Because what you really want to be is accurate enough so that you can make leadership decisions and take action based on futuristic leadership and not just informing, which is a lot of what you see by some of the other people on this. The other thing you need to really understand when you look at futurist leaderships is you need to not be constantly updating it every year in the sense of the forecast. If I say something's going to happen in 2030, and then in 2022, I say it's a different time in 2035. Oh, in 2023, I say, oh, that really now is 2035. I'm not being a very good futuristic leader if I begin taking the same action and changing it that much. So you need to lay out within a futurist view what is there and what's going to happen with it. And I love your topic today. It's one of the places where in my career I've made a lot of fun over the years. I've done futurist work for over half the Fortune 100, a lot of governments and a lot of government agencies. And I just actually last week signed a new contract to go back and help the U.S. Space Agency define what wicked problems are and how, as a futurist, they can begin to handle the future wicked problems in space. And I can't wait to get started on that little project this week. So a lot of going there, but your topic is so timely for me, and I appreciate you letting me be part of it.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Marshall, what you want to add for futuristic leadership? Then, all in present world, we are actually observing there are a lot of unrest in Ukraine war. We are against any kind of war because how actually present situation we are observing many leaders cannot play properly because of this kind of unrest. We are observing the same thing in Middle East, in different countries. World Talent Economy Forum actually against any kind of war because it creates a lot of problem for leadership development. And we are observing those who are good leaders. We are observing Ukraine president is a very good leader, but at some points his people actually dying. What we are observing in Pakistan, this is not actually acceptable as well. Even Imran Khan, especially for the youth, he is a great leader for us. Even in the Middle East, what happening in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, or any countries, we are against any kind of unrest, and we want our global leaders, those who join today, they also can request to their community and we can work together for global peace. This is one of our agenda. Mr. Marshall, what you want to add for today's dialogue? And we have a great news actually. Even World Tourism Organization Secretary General, also he's our chief advisor, Dr. Talib Rafael. He also joined today's discussion. He's a great leader, great political leaders, and very, very kind person who always support and motivate World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you, Dr. Talib, for joining today. Mr. Marshall, I want to give chance.
Okay, thank you, Sharif. Well, contrary to what some people believe, futurists don't predict the future. Instead, they help make more individuals and organizations ensure that they're not surprised by what the future might bring. I think that's the role of futurists. This prediction stuff, as was pointed out by some of the previous speakers, is not too successful. Thinking like a futurist involves looking into a different set of possibilities and scenarios, as opposed to picking one path and sticking to it. I think the classic was Donald Steiny, Professor Steiny pointed out that there are, you need to think about different scenarios. I think Professor David Smith also pointed that out, and so did Professor Shihan. So I think these are all subjects that you have to think as in psychology. As those who know me, I'm a clinical psychology background. We try to do what's called Gestalt psychology. In other words, think out of the box. And to do that, one needs to think of various possibilities and scenarios. And I think most leaders use the old way of thinking, where they find one possible scenario to the future and plan everything around it. I think that's what we saw in the beginning of the war in Ukraine with Putin. He thought he would just roll in and take it over. He was taken by surprise. His people were surprised. But it also helps to tell the truth. If you don't tell the truth, then it's hard for people to believe what you're saying. And I think intuitively people know the truth. A lot of people don't, as we see in Russia. A lot of people believe the dialogue and the diatribes that are purported by the Russian government. But the rest of the world seems to hear other messages. And I think that's the concept of futurist thinking, is different scenarios, different messages, different channels of communication. If you channel everything through one pipe, then what's going to happen is you're going to have a clogged pipe. And at the end of the day, you're going to need Drano to clear it out in the United States. I don't know what they have in other parts of the world to clean out pipes, but that's what's going to happen. And that's what we see in war. And I agree with you, Sharif. We really do not like war. War is destructive. It's counterproductive to human productivity and to the future. All it does is it locks people down, makes people angry, and from a psychological point of view, creates trauma. And I think the biggest thing about being a futurist is to try to think in a way that reduces trauma to other people. And at the same, and that's a psychological thing, not a technology thing, and not a management thing. I think it's about being human, and that's where the thinking like a futurist comes in. Being able to think like a futurist is a crucial skill, because companies and organizations that aren't prepared for the future will have a much harder time adapting, and will likely get disrupted, as one of our other panelists discussed. Disruption sometimes is good. Somebody pointed out Elon Musk likes to disrupt, but for most people in the planet, disruption is not a kind thing to them. It causes trauma emotionally, and I think we need to think about that and think about what can we do as futurist thinkers to be able to think out of the box, that Gestalt thinking that allows us to find solutions as opposed to creating more problems. So on that point, I'll leave it to the rest of the panelists, who are all professors. I'm not a professor. I don't claim to be one. All I know is that as a practical business person, I'm confronted with threats and issues all the time. And the way we deal with them is we think out of the box. We use Gestalt thinking, and we do lateral thinking. Yes, linear thinking helps. A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. But sometimes you have to connect the dots of Q, Z, K, and A. And I recommend that people learn how to do that. It is teachable, and it is doable. Thank you very much, and everybody have a great week.
Thank you, Mr. Marshalls. You are actually professor in practice. You are taking a lot of industrial initiatives, and you solve the problem. So we want to welcome you in developing world. And I want to give chance Professor Talib, but Professor Edward, if you have a good relation with Elon Musk, please request him, because his Starlink project is very, very important, because my friend, Dr. Talib, has internet problem, but we need to support him. He's a very, very important person for us. The more they can support in Jordan, it will be helpful for our leaders, our futuristic leaders, Dr. Talib, and it will be helpful for the Jordan people and the developing world. Dr. Talib, what you want to add for today's dialogue? Dr. Talib, can you hear me? Sorry, he has internet problem. I'm sorry about that. He's a very, very good leader, very successful leader, political leader. He contributed a lot for ILO, for UNWTO, for World Tourism Organization, World Economic Forum, and for his country. Professor Edward, what is your concluding remarks for today?
Okay, well, this has been a very interesting discussion indeed. I'll make a couple of points. My organization is called the World Talent, or sorry, yours is the World Talent Economic Forum. Mine is the Human Achievement Alliance, because I see all of this focusing on humans, human flourishing and human well-being. I love technology, as I'm sure everybody on this call does, but I see technology as tools to help us be the best humans we can be. So I want to emphasize that point as well. And indeed, I think that when we're looking at the future, part of what we're trying to do is not predict. Everybody, I think, is right that no good futurist says I can predict exactly this or that or the other. What we try to do is understand how social organizations, technology, public policy, and so forth are moving, so that we're ready to see us moving in this direction a little bit, it's moving in that direction. Here's what we can do to make the situation better. I tend to think the people who are going to make the situation better are indeed the entrepreneurs, the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks, the people like that who are going to actually do it. The best that governments can do is basically to empower and allow those folks to do their thing. By the way, I like to, and here's another good book. Fred probably knows this one as well, Robot Proof. And the idea of we have a system in most countries of where, if you lose your job, well, the government gives you a little bit of money, but what we need is just-in-time talent, and there's a whole issue going on there. I know we've had things about that. I'll mention one other thing. This is an organization just founded at the Florida Atlantic University, the Madden Value Creation Center. And what's interesting about Bart Madden's book is some of the discussion we've had about short-term versus long-term if you're in a corporation. What Bart Madden does in his book is he looks at corporations and shows what many of us know, that too many of them focus on the short term, and therefore, well, we've got some profits in the short term, but in the long term, they fail. And in fact, one of the reasons, by the way, Amazon was able to have very low earnings, but still have a lot of investment is because a lot of investors said, oh, well, they have low earnings this quarter, but we see what they're doing with their money. They're reinvesting it. And so it's going to make for a better future. If you take a look at Steve Jobs, when he returned to Apple, it's a very good instructive situation where he was always trying to say what's coming next so we can essentially compete with ourselves. And but the one thing I want to leave everybody with, and I have to jump off in a minute myself here, is that exponential technology means that changes are going to come much quicker than they have in the past. That's a reality, and we see it every day. And so these are going to be much more important discussions than, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, where we could sit around and read science fiction books and say, well, maybe 20 years from now or 30 years from now, we might have to face the following. We're facing things every day now. And so being a good futurist thinker is going to be more important than ever. And I hope everybody, all your listeners, will take into account the fine comments on this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Dr. Talib, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Professor, you are excellent leader. Even yesterday night, I just do some research on your uh, like portfolios and your previously what you done for your countries, and I saw you start your career as a professor, as an academicians, then you get into the politics, corporations, UN, everywhere you actually sunshine and you are a great leader. So my questions to you, what is your advice for the uh, present people like the new generation that how they can develop a better career like you? Because I'm really impressed how you contribute for your country and how you contribute for the global community.
Thank you so much, Sharif. I'm not sure I deserve all of that, but I want to tell you something. I have passion. Passion is very important. When you are into something, you have to like it. You have to exhibit the passion. I was not in tourism at all. I came into tourism by accident, but I loved it. I believed in it. That's why I did well. Alhamdulillah. I did well. Now I was only doing my job, nothing more, nothing less. That's the key for everything. Have passion for everything and do your job. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Talib. That is important. That World Talent Economy Forum always bring the best people around the world. Uh, like we have a great people like Professor Fred, Professor Shaheen, Mr. Marshall, Professor David Smith, and Dr. Talib Raphael. All of them actually great leaders, and they contribute a lot for their country, for their people, and that is the way actually we can develop better talent economy. If anyone, I always say, if anyone want to be a good politician, follow Dr. Talib and take his mentorship. If you want to be a good, great
Thank you.
professor, you can work with
Thank you.
and you can take some guideline from Professor Fred Philip, Professor Shaheen. And if you want to be a great corporate person, you can take mentorship from Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall. That is the way we can develop better world. But
That's right.
somehow, how we are observing right now, the great leaders, they are in trouble. Yes, Ukraine president, I saw that he's an excellent leader, but in trouble. Imran Khan, I'm very honest with you. If you see the social media and everything, I am at least a big fan when he win World Cup in 1992, and how he contributing for his countries. It's excellent, but because of politics and the I want to say bad system of the country, many people actually in trouble. But we need more support for great leaders, because then the young people, the youth communities, they can inspire and they can take more initiative. And we need all of your support. Professor Shaheen, what is your concluding remarks for today's session?
Thank you so much. It was a very fruitful session and it was a great learning for me. And in fact, I agree with all of the forum members that yes, in fact, my grandfather always said the only thing that I can say about the future is different. And in future, of course, things will be different and we have to deal with it. And of course, as a leader, in fact, I don't consider myself leader at all. I am still a student in the leadership, but I think that as a leader, we have to find a way to bring the humanistic approach to the whole development that we have. Otherwise, we never ever get rid of all of this war, all of this greed, all of these coups that we have. Either it's happening in Myanmar or Burma, or it's happening in Africa. So, if we cannot bring that part of the humanistic nature of the leadership, forever we will face this problem. That's my two
That's
cents. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Professor Shaheen.
right.
Thank you. And we request, like you are from MSU, we want to collaborate with any university, and we have a huge content. I think more than 527 content we have, 100% free. All of the great people from around the world, they join in our dialogue, and I can say that this is extremely, extremely valuable for developing world. So your collaboration and your support also valuable for us. Professor Fred Philip, uh, what is your concluding remarks for today?
There we are. Um, yeah, this has been a tremendously stimulating session, and I learned a lot from everyone. I guess to conclude, I want to emphasize that in organizations, the planning for the future is almost always done not by an individual within the organization, but with a team or a committee. So David showed the different personality approaches that an individual might take, but what about the team? So really, the point I want to emphasize is that the dimensions of the future that I mentioned, people's perception of the time scale, what is the future, optimism, pessimism, whether you create the future or the future happens to you. All these dimensions are implicit, and people come to the planning meeting never having articulated these dimensions of the future to themselves. So the futurist leader needs to elicit these attitudes from the committee members before diving into prediction or future planning. Because if you jump right in and then these things come out later and you say, "Oh, Mary, why are you always so pessimistic?" Then it stops up the process and things come out that really should have come out much earlier. So yeah, people's attitudes about the future are implicit. You need to bring them out early in any planning. The leader needs to bring them out early in any planning exercise. Um, Mr. Steiny mentioned Frederick Taylor, who was the founder of management science operations research. That was my original field of study. And, it's a very sad irony, since we talk about war, that it blossomed during World War II. These operations research techniques developed for radar countermeasures, for gunnery ranging, and the famous origin story about the holes in the airplanes. I'm sure you've heard that. If you haven't, we don't have time to go into it. But and then it expanded in post-war. Right now, the operations research profession has really diverged from the futurology because operations researchers are preoccupied with the analytics movement, with big data, and the humanist aspect of futurism has been sidelined in the operations research. Um, so that's unfortunate, and I can hope for a reconciliation at some future time. There is a place for trend extrapolation, uh, point prediction of the future. But people have to realize that that a trend is a trend until it bends, as one famous futurist said. There's limits. The classic story in trend extrapolation is the increasing speed of airplanes. It can't increase without bound, because sooner or later the airplane becomes a spacecraft, and it's not goes so fast to escape the gravitational pull of the Earth, and then of course you need a completely different kind of craft. So you have to recognize these limits to trend extrapolation, and that is Mr. Kurzweil's problem. He thinks everything is exponential growth, and he never thinks that you really should predict using S-shaped curves rather than exponential curves. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fred. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
I agree 100% with what Fred just said, is that trend analysis by itself often is wrong as much as it's right. And that's really why the 6 V's are there, is it takes a different look. And it's not one person, but it's really using group intelligence. And the fact that if I were to set up a future group, I would tend to staff it with people who have the different views of the future, and you put them together. But what I really like to say in a conclusion on this is that we've heard the terms today, predicting and forecasting. And predicting and forecasting are different. I can predict the future and I can say, gee, even though the sun's shining outside, it's going to rain. And that's a prediction. But a forecast would begin to use more methods. It uses a a framework and a process to come out with a forecast versus a prediction. And as you look at futuristic leadership, that is really very important to understand. It's not just making a prediction about the future, it's using a formal method and approach and framework to really talk about the future. And when you start looking at futuristic leadership, you need to understand change is constant and it's going to change. Nothing's going to be static. In today's age, what we've seen is change is not incremental, it's exponential. And while no one can exactly predict the future, we can anticipate the course of known trends. But unexpected or wildcard events are the key reasons why known future trends are not foolproof. And when we look at the future, it's there. And, it would be great if all of our forecasts were there, but we live in a world increasingly shaken by discontinuity and sudden changes. And those are the things that cause us to really have the need for futuristic leadership. So, what we have to do now is we must put in strategies that embrace the what if questions, because the what if questions are really where futuristic leadership comes to play. It's not just if I can take where I am today and draw the line to the future, that won't happen because of the world we live in. So you have to be able to say that, but then to say, what if happens? What if we have a global pandemic? What if the currency changes? What if war breaks out? What if supply chains logistics changes? What if the trend to going to least cost manufacturing is disrupted by all the things I just got through talking about, which is one of the big what ifs today? And this is where futuristic leadership comes into play, is understanding what has happened, but really going out and understanding these are where we see the forecast happening. These are the possibilities. These are the disruptors to that forecast. These are the other things that if we see this early warning indication, which is called precursor analysis, if we see this early warning indication, how that's going to affect these trajectories. And a futuristic leadership has to understand the breadth of those, not just the one singularity curve. And that is why it is called leadership, is you have to take these together, turn them into action, get the people around you to understand why you did it and the plan you're putting forward. And that's where futuristic leadership really is based on that, looking out the windshield. And I'd like to say, even looking out beyond where my headlights can shine. And that what will give you a good futuristic leadership perspective. So Sharif, thank you so much. I teach a 5-day week-long course on how do you forecast and plan the future. So you've guided me well to summarize it in these few steps. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Dr. Talib, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Thank you, Professor David. I think David summed it up very well for the future. Now, what I want to say is that a leader is a leader, whether it's now or in the future. It doesn't matter. The future is coming anyhow. The future will change. All what he said about the changes that are about to happen are happening now. We have pandemics, we have wars, we have supply chains disrupted, we have the currency disrupted. All of that is happening, Professor David. So I think that leadership is a matter of quality. And here I want to add something else to what I said about passion. I want to add something called popularism. There's a difference between being popular and adopting a popularist policy. Populism is very, very serious matter. You can't be popularist because popularism is seeking your own good by turning the people into just sheer leaders. That is not what leadership is all about. Leadership is about leadership. You don't have to be popular amongst your people to lead them. You can lead them without being popularist. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, thank you, Sharif. This has been an excellent forum. And again, I think the future concept for the developing world is really critical. And I think what we need to do is we need to take what all the panelists have said under advisement and think long and hard about how to do what needs to be done to take and make a better world for what we have. In my world, which is, as everyone knows, is more to do with the climate crisis and addressing that, that's here and now. And there have been futurist reports coming out of the IPCC, one just issued at the beginning of April and one in February, that don't bode well for us. But the nice thing about these reports is they do give us some options. And as I said before, we need to look at different pathways and see what pathways will get us to the next step and improve the climate and improve soil health, water health, and air quality. That's what our mission is with our group. And we're proud to be part of the World Talent Economy Forum to help move that forward, especially in Malaysia and other developing parts of the world. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. This is excellent session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, with your corporation, with academics. And I believe through this dialogue, we can change many people's life. Already, World Talent Economy Forum, India, we engage with 30,000 people and we are launching Nikola Tesla technology, real innovations, real solution we are providing. We are working with Bangladesh. Just recently, we are collaborating with Central Bank. We are helping them for climate change related policy. We are working with Pakistan, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, Australia, China, Rwanda, Middle East, many countries we are working. And one request from our side, as we have very, very important person and think tank from developed world, I believe that developed nation, they should not invest more in wire industry. They can invest in more in developing world. We have a lot of challenges. We need food and safety and security. We need energy solution. We need healthcare support. We need more technology. If developed world invest more for doing this kind of things, doing this kind of projects, maybe we can develop more effective solutions and we can develop a better ecosystem for this world. So we need to work together, both the developed world and developing world. Developed nations has resources, you have knowledge, you have expertise, you have technology, and developing nations has a lot of good people. So if we march together, maybe we can develop the next new world. That is the concept of World Talent Economy Forum. And I believe already millions of people, the government, corporate body, public-private partnerships, startup ecosystem, everyone supporting this World Talent Economy Forum initiative and this organization for people's organization. This organization owner is Professor Shaheen, Professor Fred Philip, Professor David Smith, Professor Talib, Mr. Marshalls, and all of the audience, those who regularly support World Talent Economy Forum. This is people organizations, and with this people organization, we can develop the next new world. And this is the way I believe we can change the world. And we request, please stop this war, stop this violence, and support the humanity. Thank you for your excellent contribution. I'm sure this is excellent content for our audience. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you.